It's okay, I got you. Easy, buddy. Easy. All right, let's get you out of here. I know. You're all right. I've got you. Hang on, we're almost there.
The sun had barely begun its descent toward the western horizon when Sarah Mitchell noticed something unusual on the shoulder of Highway 40, just outside of Richmond, Virginia. At first glance, it appeared to be nothing more than a discarded bag, or perhaps a pile of old clothes, the kind of roadside debris that sadly decorated America's highways with depressing regularity. But something made her slow down, some inexplicable instinct that whispered urgently in the back of her mind, telling her that this was different, that this mattered. As her silver Honda came to a stop on the gravel shoulder, dust rising in small clouds around her tires, Sarah's heart began to pound with a mixture of dread and anticipation. Through her windshield, she could now see that the object was neither a bag nor clothing. It was alive, or at least it had been recently. A dog lay motionless on the sparse grass that separated the asphalt from the drainage ditch, its body twisted in an unnatural position that spoke of violent impact and tremendous pain. Sarah's hands trembled as she turned off the engine and reached for her phone, her nurse's training immediately kicking in, even as her heart broke at the sight before her. She had seen trauma before. 15 years in the emergency room had exposed her to humanity's fragility in ways that still sometimes kept her awake at night. But there was something about the vulnerability of an injured animal, something about the complete innocence and helplessness that struck a different chord in her soul. The dog was a medium-sized mixed breed, perhaps a combination of Labrador and something else. It was difficult to tell beneath the dirt, blood, and obvious injuries that marked his golden-brown coat. His breathing was shallow and rapid, each breath a visible struggle that made his ribcage rise and fall with painful effort. One of his hind legs was bent at an angle that made Sarah's stomach turn, clearly broken, and there was blood, too much blood, matted in his fur and pooling slightly beneath him. "Oh, sweetheart," Sarah whispered as she approached slowly, her voice catching with emotion. "What happened to you?" The dog's eyes, a beautiful amber color that seemed to glow even through the haze of pain, flickered open at the sound of her voice. There was fear in those eyes, certainly, but also something else, a plea, a desperate hope that perhaps this human would be different from the one who had struck him and driven away, different from whoever had allowed him to become a stray in the first place. Sarah knelt beside him, careful not to touch him yet, knowing that even the gentlest contact could cause agony to his broken body. She could see now that he wasn't just injured from being hit by a vehicle. He was also malnourished, his ribs visible beneath his coat, his hip bones protruding sharply. This was a dog who had been struggling for survival long before the car had struck him, a soul who had been fighting battles that most would never know about. "I'm going to help you," she said softly, pulling out her phone with shaking hands. "I promise you, I'm not going to leave you here." Her first call was to Dr. Robert Chen at Riverside Emergency Veterinary Hospital, a facility she had worked with before when she found injured wildlife near her home. Dr. Chen answered on the second ring, and Sarah quickly explained the situation, her professional composure barely masking the emotion in her voice. "Sarah, listen to me carefully," Dr. Chen said, his calm voice an anchor in the moment. "If he's been hit by a car and has been lying there for a while, he's likely in shock. We need to get him here as quickly as possible, but moving him incorrectly could make things worse. Do you have anything in your car we could use as a makeshift stretcher?" Sarah's mind raced through the contents of her vehicle. "I have a yoga mat in the trunk and some blankets." "Perfect. Here's what you're going to do." Following Dr. Chen's instructions with the precision of someone accustomed to emergency situations, Sarah carefully positioned the yoga mat beside the injured dog. The most difficult part would be moving him onto it without causing additional damage to his broken leg or potentially injured spine. She talked to him the entire time, her voice steady and soothing, explaining each step as if he could understand every word. "I know this is going to hurt, sweetheart, and I'm so sorry, but we need to get you to people who can help you feel better. You're being so brave, such a good boy." The dog whimpered when she finally had to slide him onto the mat, a sound so filled with pain and confusion that tears began streaming down Sarah's face. But he didn't snap at her or try to bite, didn't fight her attempts to help him. Instead, those amber eyes remained fixed on her face, trusting in a way that seemed both beautiful and heartbreaking, given how recently he must have been betrayed by human negligence. Getting him into the back seat of her car required careful maneuvering and every ounce of strength Sarah possessed. Though he probably weighed only 50 or 60 pounds, far less than he should have for his frame, the awkwardness of the yoga mat stretcher and the need to keep his body stable made the task monumentally difficult. By the time she had him settled across the back seat, with blankets tucked carefully around him to keep him from rolling during the drive, she was sweating and breathing hard. "Okay, buddy," she said, climbing into the driver's seat and starting the engine. "We're gonna get you help now. Just hold on for me. Please, hold on." The drive to Riverside Emergency Veterinary Hospital normally took 25 minutes, but Sarah made it in 17, her hazard lights flashing as she exceeded the speed limit for the first time in years, praying that any police officer who might see her would understand the urgency. She kept talking to the dog the entire way, checking him in the rearview mirror, monitoring his breathing, watching for any signs that he was deteriorating further. "You're going to make it," she said, as much to convince herself as to encourage him. "You're a fighter, I can see that, and I'm going to make sure you get every chance to fight." Dr. Chen and 2 veterinary technicians were waiting at the entrance when Sarah pulled up, a gurney already prepared. They moved with swift efficiency, transferring the dog from Sarah's car to their gurney with practiced care, rushing him into the treatment area while firing questions at Sarah about how she'd found him, how long he might have been lying there, what she'd observed about his injuries and condition. "He's in shock, severely dehydrated, and hypothermic despite the warm weather," Dr. Chen announced to his team as they wheeled the dog into the examination room. "Let's get IV fluids started immediately, warm blankets, and I need full x-rays. Sarah, you did everything right. Now we need you to wait outside while we work. This is going to take a while." The waiting room became Sarah's world for the next 3 hours. She called her husband, Mark, explaining why she would be late getting home and telling him about the dog she found. Mark, who had lived with Sarah long enough to know that her compassionate heart left her incapable of turning away from suffering, simply asked if there was anything she needed him to bring her, and told her he loved her. She called her supervisor at the hospital where she worked, explaining that she might need to adjust her schedule over the next few days depending on how this situation developed. She scrolled mindlessly through her phone, then gave up and simply sat, watching the door to the treatment area, praying to whatever forces might be listening that this beautiful, broken creature would survive. When Dr. Chen finally emerged, his scrubs marked with blood and his expression exhausted but cautiously optimistic, Sarah jumped to her feet. "He's alive," Dr. Chen said, and Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief. "But Sarah, I'm going to be honest with you. It's bad. He has a severely fractured femur in his right hind leg, 3 broken ribs, a pneumothorax, that's a collapsed lung, and significant internal bruising. He's also severely malnourished and dehydrated, which complicates everything. He'd been on the streets for a while before he was hit." "But he'll survive?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "With surgery, intensive care, and a lot of luck, maybe. The leg is going to require orthopedic surgery. We'll need to insert pins and plates to stabilize the fracture." The lung should reinflate on its own now that we've addressed it, but he'll need to be monitored constantly. The ribs will heal with time and rest. The internal bruising, we'll have to watch closely and hope there's no organ damage we haven't detected yet. How much? Sarah asked, knowing that veterinary emergency care was expensive and specialized orthopedic surgery even more so. Dr. Chen sighed. For everything, the surgery, the hospitalization, the medications, the follow-up care, you're probably looking at somewhere between $8,000 and $12,000, possibly more if complications arise. Sarah felt the number hit her like a physical blow. She and Mark were comfortable, but they weren't wealthy. They had a mortgage, car payments, or student loans from nursing school. $12,000 was a staggering sum. But when she closed her eyes, all she could see were those amber eyes looking up at her from the roadside, trusting her, believing that she would help. Do it, she said. Do the surgery. Do whatever he needs. Sarah, that's incredibly generous, but I want you to think about this. You don't know this dog. He might not have the temperament for rehabilitation. He might have behavioral issues that made him a stray in the first place, and there's no guarantee. I know, Sarah interrupted. I know all of that, but he was lying there on the side of the road, alone and broken, and he looked at me like I was his last hope. I can't turn my back on that. I won't. Dr. Chen studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, we'll schedule the surgery for first thing tomorrow morning. He needs to be stabilized overnight first anyway. But Sarah, I think you should see him before you go home. I think you both need that. They allowed her into the recovery area, where the dog lay on a heated pad in a large cage, IV lines running into his front leg, oxygen being supplemented through nasal prongs. He looked small and vulnerable, wrapped in warm blankets, with only his head and one front paw visible. But when Sarah approached and softly called to him, his eyes opened, and his tail, which had somehow escaped serious injury, managed the tiniest wag. "Hey there, brave boy," Sarah whispered, kneeling beside the cage. The technician opened the door slightly so Sarah could gently stroke the dog's head, careful to avoid his injuries. "You're safe now. I know everything hurts, and I know you're scared, but you're safe. Tomorrow the doctors are going to fix your leg, and then you're going to get better, and I'm going to be right here, okay?" The dog's eyes drifted closed, but his head pressed ever so slightly into her palm, a gesture of trust that made Sarah's throat tighten with emotion. She stayed there for another 20 minutes, just being present with him, wanting him to know that he wasn't alone anymore, that someone cared whether he lived or died. When she finally drove home that night, exhausted and emotionally drained, Mark was waiting up for her. He took one look at her face and pulled her into his arms, letting her cry against his shoulder as she released all the fear, sadness, and hope she'd been holding inside. "We're going to help him, aren't we?" Mark asked, though it wasn't really a question. "We have to," Sarah replied. "I looked into his eyes, Mark, and I don't know how to explain it. I saw a soul that wasn't ready to give up, that was still hoping for something better." "You couldn't," Mark said simply. "That's who you are. That's one of the reasons I love you. So, what do we need to do?" Together, they began making plans. They would dip into their savings, the fund they'd been building for a vacation to Italy that could wait another year. Sarah would pick up extra shifts at the hospital when she could. They would cut back on eating out, on unnecessary expenses. Whatever it took, they would make it work. The surgery the next morning lasted 4 hours. Sarah couldn't concentrate at work, checking her phone constantly for updates from Dr. Chen. When the call finally came, she stepped away from the nurse's station, her heart pounding. "He made it through," Dr. Chen said, and Sarah could hear the smile in his voice. The surgery went better than expected. The fracture was clean enough that we could stabilize it well with the hardware. His vitals stayed stable throughout, and he's in recovery now. He's not out of the woods yet, The next 72 hours are critical. But Sarah, I think he's going to make it. He's a fighter. Sarah had to sit down, relief making her lightheaded. Can I see him? Come by after your shift. He should be awake by then. When Sarah arrived at the clinic that evening, she found the dog was indeed awake, though clearly groggy from the anesthesia and pain medication. His right hind leg was now stabilized in a complex-looking external fixator, metal pins and bars, holding the bone in proper alignment. It looked medieval and painful, but Dr. Chen assured her it was exactly what he needed. "Hey there, warrior," Sarah said softly, approaching his cage. "You did so well today. I'm so proud of you." The dog's tail thumped weakly against the blanket, and something inside Sarah's chest seemed to crack open. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. This wasn't just about saving an injured animal. Something deeper was happening here, a bond forming that she couldn't fully explain, but could definitely feel. "He needs a name," she said to the technician who was checking the dog's vitals. "We can't just keep calling him the dog." The young woman smiled. "What are you thinking?" Sarah studied the dog, taking in his amber eyes, his golden brown coat, the way he seemed to radiate warmth even in his injured state. "Phoenix," she said, "because he's rising from the ashes of his old life into something new." "Phoenix," the technician repeated. "I like it. It suits him." Over the following days, Sarah visited Phoenix every morning before work and every evening after her shift. She watched as he slowly began to improve, his appetite returning tentatively at first, then with growing enthusiasm, his eyes becoming clearer and more alert, his tail wagging more vigorously when she entered the room. The veterinary staff fell in love with him, marveling at his gentle nature despite everything he'd been through. Most dogs who've been hit by cars and suffered this kind of trauma develop fear or aggression, Dr. Chen observed one evening as Sarah sat beside Phoenix's cage, hand-feeding him pieces of chicken. But Phoenix, it's like he understands that everyone here is trying to help him. His temperament is remarkable. On the 5th day after his surgery, Phoenix stood for the first time, balancing awkwardly on 3 legs, while the 4th, still in its fixator, hung carefully positioned. The entire staff gathered to watch and cheer him on, and when he managed to hobble a few steps before sitting down again, clearly exhausted but proud, there wasn't a dry eye in the treatment area. "That's my boy," Sarah exclaimed, tears streaming down her face. "That's my brave, strong, amazing boy." Phoenix looked at her, and for the first time since she'd found him, his tail didn't just wag. It wagged happily, enthusiastically, the whole back half of his body wiggling with joy despite his injuries. After 10 days of intensive care, Dr. Chen declared Phoenix stable enough to continue his recovery at home. Sarah and Mark had spent the weekend preparing, converting their spare bedroom into a recovery space with non-slip flooring, a comfortable orthopedic bed, and easy access to water and food bowls. They'd purchased a special harness to help support Phoenix's weight while he learned to walk again, installed a ramp for the back door so he wouldn't have to navigate stairs, and stocked up on all the medications and supplies Dr. Chen had recommended. The ride home was Phoenix's first time in a car since Sarah had rushed him to the emergency clinic, and she worried he might be frightened, but instead he seemed curious, standing carefully in the back seat with Mark steadying him, looking out the window at the world passing by as if seeing it for the first time. "Welcome home, Phoenix," Sarah said as they pulled into their driveway. "This is where you live now. This is your forever home." The first few weeks were challenging. Phoenix needed help with everything: getting up, lying down, moving from room to room, going outside to use the bathroom. The harness became Sarah's constant companion, helping her support his weight as he slowly, painfully relearned how to navigate the world on 3.5 legs. There were setbacks, Days when he seemed too tired or in too much pain to make progress. Nights when he whimpered in his sleep. Mornings when Sarah wondered if she'd taken on more than she could handle. But there were victories too. The first time Phoenix managed to navigate the ramp on his own. The day he successfully went outside, did his business, and came back inside without needing help. Sarah called Mark at work to share the news, both of them celebrating as if Phoenix had climbed Mount Everest. The evening, Phoenix carefully climbed onto the couch and curled up next to Sarah, laying his head in her lap with a contented sigh, as if to say, This is what I was waiting for. This is home. Physical therapy became part of their routine. 3 times a week, Sarah drove Phoenix to a veterinary rehabilitation center where he worked with therapists in an underwater treadmill, the water supporting his weight while he rebuilt muscle and strength. He wore a brave expression during these sessions, his amber eyes focused and determined, even when the exercises were clearly difficult and tiring. He's exceeding all our expectations, his physical therapist, Maria, told Sarah during one session. Most dogs with this level of trauma take 6 months to recover basic mobility. Phoenix is doing it in 3. It's like he's motivated by something we can't quite see. Like he knows he has a purpose now, and he's determined to fulfill it. As Phoenix's body healed, his personality emerged more fully. He turned out to be gentle and affectionate, always wanting to be near Sarah or Mark, following them from room to room as his mobility improved. He was patient with other dogs they met on slow walks around the neighborhood, friendly with the delivery people who came to the door, and absolutely beloved by the neighbor children, who quickly learned that Phoenix loved gentle pets and didn't mind if they sat quietly beside him on the front porch. But Sarah noticed something else too. Phoenix seemed to have a special awareness of people who were hurting. When Sarah came home from particularly difficult shifts at the hospital, emotionally drained from the suffering she'd witnessed, Phoenix would press against her legs, offering his presence as comfort. When Mark threw out his back and spent a weekend moving carefully around the house, Phoenix stayed right by his side, as if standing guard over his recovery. He knows, Mark said one evening, watching Phoenix carefully position himself next to Sarah on the couch, his head resting on her knee. He knows what it's like to hurt, so he recognizes it in others. 3 months after the surgery, Phoenix returned to Dr. Chen's office for x-rays and evaluation. The news was better than anyone had dared hope. The bone had healed beautifully, stronger even than before, thanks to the careful surgical work. The external fixator could come off, though Phoenix would need to continue taking it easy and building strength gradually. The day they removed the fixator was emotional for everyone involved. Phoenix stood patiently while Dr. Chen and his team carefully removed each pin and bar. And when it was finally off, and he took his first steps on all 4 legs, the entire clinic erupted in applause. "Look at you," Sarah exclaimed, kneeling to hug him carefully. "You're whole again, Phoenix. You did it." Phoenix's tail wagged so hard his entire body shook, and he licked Sarah's face enthusiastically, his joy evident and infectious. But the real miracle came a few weeks later, when Sarah received an unexpected phone call from a woman named Jennifer, who worked at a local children's hospital. "Ms. Mitchell, I hope this isn't an intrusion," Jennifer said, "but I heard about Phoenix through a friend who works at Dr. Chen's clinic. She told me about his incredible recovery and his gentle temperament, and I wanted to ask, have you ever considered having Phoenix certified as a therapy dog?" Sarah was stunned. She'd never thought about it, but as Jennifer explained the program, how therapy dogs visited hospital patients, providing comfort and emotional support, something clicked into place. This was it. This was Phoenix's purpose, the thing Maria had sensed he was working toward. Children who are dealing with painful medical procedures, long hospital stays, scary diagnoses, they often feel isolated and frightened, Jennifer explained. But a visit from a therapy dog can transform their day. And a dog like Phoenix, who has his own story of injury and recovery, he could be incredibly inspiring. Sarah looked at Phoenix, who was resting on his bed but watching her intently, as if he knew something important was being discussed. "He'd be perfect for it," Sarah said quietly. "Let me talk to my husband, but yes, I think this is exactly what Phoenix was meant to do." The certification process took several months of training and evaluation. Phoenix had to demonstrate that he could remain calm in chaotic environments, respond reliably to commands, interact gently with people of all ages, and handle being touched, sometimes awkwardly, by children and adults who might not know how to properly pet a dog. Phoenix excelled at every test. It was as if he understood the importance of what he was being trained for, as if his own suffering had opened his heart in a way that allowed him to connect with others who were hurting. On a crisp autumn morning, almost exactly 1 year after Sarah had found Phoenix on the side of Highway 40, he made his first official visit to Children's Memorial Hospital. Wearing his therapy dog vest and walking confidently beside Sarah, Phoenix entered the pediatric ward and began visiting rooms. The first child they met was a 7-year-old girl named Emma, who was recovering from her 3rd surgery to correct a spinal deformity. She'd been in the hospital for 2 weeks, missing her own dog at home, feeling lonely and scared about the long recovery ahead of her. "Emma, this is Phoenix," Sarah said gently, leading him to the side of the girl's bed. "He's a very special dog who knows exactly what it's like to hurt and have to work hard to get better." As Sarah told Emma about finding Phoenix on the roadside, about his broken leg and long recovery, about the physical therapy and the determination it took for him to walk again, the little girl's eyes grew wide. "He was hurt like me?" Emma asked, reaching out tentatively to touch Phoenix's head. "Just like you," Sarah confirmed. "And look at him now. He's strong and happy, and he comes here to visit kids like you, to remind them that they can get through hard things too." Phoenix, as if understanding the conversation, carefully placed his head on the edge of Emma's bed, close enough for her to pet him easily. The little girl stroked his soft fur, and for the first time since her surgery, she smiled. A real, genuine smile that made her mother, sitting in the corner of the room, begin to cry tears of relief and joy. They visited 6 more children that day, and the story was the same in every room. Phoenix brought comfort, hope, and joy to kids who desperately needed all 3. He seemed to know exactly how to behave with each child, gentle and calm with those who were very sick, playful and energetic with those who needed cheering up, patient and still with those who were scared. In the hallway as they were preparing to leave, Jennifer approached Sarah with tears in her eyes. "Do you know what one of the nurses just told me?" she asked. "She said Emma hasn't smiled since she woke up from surgery 2 weeks ago. Her parents have been worried sick. But Phoenix gave her hope. He showed her that recovery is possible, that pain doesn't last forever, that there's joy waiting on the other side of suffering." Sarah looked down at Phoenix, who gazed back at her with those knowing amber eyes, and she felt her own eyes fill with tears. "You know what the most amazing part is?" Sarah said. "A year ago, he was the one lying broken on the side of a road, probably thinking his life was over. And now he's here, giving other people, other kids, the same gift that strangers gave him." Over the months and years that followed, Phoenix became a fixture at Children's Memorial Hospital, visiting every week, touching countless lives with his presence and his story. Children who were facing their own difficult recoveries drew strength from knowing that Phoenix had overcome his injuries. Parents who were struggling to stay strong for their sick kids found comfort in his gentle presence. Medical staff who dealt with heartbreak and loss every day found moments of peace in his visits. Sarah began receiving letters and emails from families whose children had met Phoenix, telling her how much his visits had meant, how his story had inspired them during their darkest hours. One mother wrote, My son was ready to give up on his physical therapy after his leg surgery. He said it hurt too much, that he'd never walk normally again. Then he met Phoenix and heard his story, and something changed. He started calling himself Phoenix Jr. and approached every therapy session with new determination. You and Phoenix saved more than just his leg. You saved his spirit. On the first anniversary of Phoenix's certification as a therapy dog, the hospital held a small celebration in his honor. They presented him with a special collar and created a photo wall showing him with many of the children he'd visited over the year. Standing in front of that wall, looking at dozens of smiling faces, children who had found hope and comfort in a dog who had once been broken and abandoned, Sarah felt overwhelming gratitude. "Can you believe this is the same dog I found on the highway?" she whispered to Mark, who had his arm around her shoulders. "Yes," Mark said simply. "I absolutely can, because he was always this dog, Sarah. He was always meant to do this. He just needed someone to give him the chance. He needed someone who wouldn't drive past, who would stop and see him, who would believe he was worth saving." Phoenix, sitting at Sarah's feet and accepting pets and praise from a crowd of hospital staff and grateful families, looked up at her in that moment, and Sarah could swear she saw understanding in those amber eyes, a recognition of the journey they'd taken together, of the way two broken souls on a highway shoulder had found each other, and in doing so, had found their purpose. That night, at home, as Phoenix curled up in his favorite spot on the couch beside Sarah, she stroked his head and thought about the miracle of it all. How a split-second decision to pull over had changed everything. How the worst day of Phoenix's life, the day he was hit by a car and left for dead, had actually been the beginning of his true life, his meaningful life. "Thank you," she whispered to him. "Thank you for trusting me that day on the highway. Thank you for fighting so hard to survive. Thank you for showing me and everyone you meet what resilience looks like, what hope looks like, what unconditional love looks like." Phoenix's tail thumped contentedly against the cushion, and his eyes drifted closed, safe and secure in the knowledge that he was home, that he was loved, that he had found his purpose. Sometimes, Sarah thought, the most beautiful stories begin at the darkest moments. Sometimes, the greatest gifts come wrapped in the hardest challenges. And sometimes, a broken dog on the side of a highway and a woman who chose to stop her car can change the world. One child, one visit, one moment of hope at a time. Outside, the stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, the same stars that had been shining the night Sarah first found Phoenix. But now, everything was different. Now, Phoenix wasn't fighting for survival. He was thriving. He wasn't alone and forgotten. He was cherished and celebrated. He wasn't the end of a sad story. He was the beginning of hundreds of happy ones. And every week, when Phoenix walks through the doors of Children's Memorial Hospital in his therapy dog vest, tail wagging and eyes bright, he carried with him a message more powerful than words, that broken things can be healed, that abandoned things can be found, that hopeless situations can transform into beautiful miracles. All it takes is someone willing to stop, to see, to care, to help. And Phoenix, who had once known nothing but pain and abandonment, now knew love in abundance, and spent his days spreading it to everyone he met, one gentle interaction at a time. Proof that even the most shattered lives can be pieced back together into something whole and beautiful and meaningful. This was his purpose. This was his gift. This was his miracle. And it all began on a highway shoulder, when one person chose compassion over convenience, chose to stop rather than drive past, chose to see a suffering soul and declare, "You are worth saving." Phoenix was worth saving, and in being saved, he became a savior to countless others. That is the miracle of rescue. That is the power of second chances. That is the extraordinary beauty that can emerge from even the darkest moments, when love shows up, refuses to leave, and transforms everything it touches.